Welcome to the Maritime Executives podcast series, In the Know. I'm Tony Munoz, Editor-in-Chief. Our Executive Corner podcast will provide conversations with top executives concerning events and issues that are shaping our industry today.
On today's episode of In the Know, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Jonathan D.T. Ward. He's author of China's Vision of Victory and is internationally recognized as an expert on Chinese global strategy. Dr. Ward earned his PhD at the University of Oxford, and his consultation work and world travels have given him an enlightening perspective on how U.S.-China tensions affect the maritime industry. Listen in.
Welcome, Dr. Ward. Thank you very much for being with us today. Lately, China has become very overtly aggressive with Taiwan, demonstrating its supremacy by air and sea. Why now?
Hi, Tony. Well, look, the recent aggressive moves by China, I think, have a variety of different sort of reasons behind them. I mean, one is that China has built up a military that they are very eager to show to the world, to show this capability in multiple flashpoints and contested areas around the Indo-Pacific, but certainly in the Taiwan Strait, because this is one of the sort of core goals of the Communist Party, is to achieve this reunification. So they're demonstrating capability on one hand. They're also intimidating a Taiwanese government that has gotten much closer to the US and to other democracies in the region and has been quite successful at doing that. And I think also they are probably probing a little bit with a relatively new Biden administration. You're still in the first year here. So I think sending signals to the United States is also part of the meaning here. But bottom line, they've had this objective for quite some time. They've built a military that's designed for use in the region. And that's been really decades in the making since their, as they see it, humiliation in the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis, when the US was able to send in carrier groups and basically deter them from a position of far superior strength. So I think here we are in a moment where they are showing us that they mean business.
Well, President Biden at the recent town hall said that the United States would come to the defense of Taiwan. Is that saber rattling, or would the United States, and does the United States have the will and the power to protect Taiwan?
Well, I think, first of all, the saber rattling has certainly been from Beijing. I mean, you're talking about a regime that has taken over Hong Kong, killed Indian troops in the Himalayas last year, and has now, just at the very beginning of October, sent about 150, sorties, 150 airplanes into the Taiwan ADIZ. So they're the ones that are pushing this envelope forward and pressing the question, I think, in many, many minds these days, of whether or not Taiwan can and will be defended. And I think Biden's comments at the town hall were very important. I mean, people differ on that. They say, the policy has officially not changed, that there is some level of strategic ambiguity, I guess is what we would typically refer to. But I thought Biden came out with this very, in a very matter-of-fact, sort of very natural way. He said, yes, we will defend Taiwan. And I think that just shows perhaps where he sees this personally. And also, I think there's a really substantial recognition of the importance of Taiwan in the US military sort of position in the Pacific, and also with regard to the entire sort of alliance structure in the Pacific. So it's a very important place. And I think if the communists were to succeed in seizing Taiwan, it would change the military geography of Asia for the rest of the century. And then you have the fact that the world's semiconductor manufacturing basically takes place in that location alone at present. So it's a very important piece of geography, and I think one that we have to take very, very seriously on the US side. But we're still in a process of waking up to the entire China threat, as it were, to realizing that the state that we engaged with for 30 years economically is in fact an adversary state, a totally hostile government, not only to us, but to many other nations in the region. And Taiwan sits at the heart of that because, for example, if the Beijing were to seize Taiwan, it puts Japan's sea lines of communication in jeopardy. I mean, PLA Air Force manuals talk about the ability to cut off trade to Japan and cause famine in the Japanese islands through the seizure of Taiwan. So it breaks down the entire sort of Pacific piece. And, I think everyone's taking it very seriously.
Absolutely. The fact is that we quit recognizing Taiwan as an independent state and went back to recognizing the mainland. I mean, is that creating the problem of us defending them in the region? Or, I mean, what is the real reason that we would defend a country that we don't recognize officially?
Well, I think an enormous amount has changed in the U.S.-China relationship. And I think that, you look at where these things really began in the 1970s. You're talking about in essentially the middle of the Cold War, where we didn't even know the outcome. That the Sino-Soviet split had taken place in the prior decade. I mean, even sooner, the Soviets and the Chinese fought a border conflict in 1969, and then Kissinger takes his secret trip to Beijing in 1971, and we established this relationship. Beijing sort of flips to our side. That's partially responsible for our geostrategic sort of ability to close out the Cold War successfully. And then the relationship, I think, took on a sort of went on autopilot. Our businesses went in, they looked for a cheaper source of labor. They built supply chains in there. Now they care more about the market than the supply chains, I think, overall. And China gained permanent normal trading relations, entry to the WTO, and we basically empowered a nation that deep down at its core saw as its long-term goal surpassing the US, knocking us off the top position in the sort of, world affairs sort of picture. And ushering in what they call the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. That's what China's vision of victory is about. In their own words, all of the strategy documents, all of the vision statements that explain the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which is, as they see it, returning to a central position in world affairs. And they seek to do that by becoming the world's largest economy, building a military that can best any rival, including the United States, essentially completing their territorial ambitions in the region, and becoming the world's economic and military center. And then this goes into a phase that they call the community of common destiny for all mankind, where they basically have a world order with China at the center, at the top, and everybody else is sort of exists in various states of relative subservience,
Yes,
So,
right.
So it's a very terrible vision that we're dealing with now, and it's why I think governments across the world now have really changed their thinking on Beijing, but that has happened way late in the game. So when you're talking about the recognition of Taiwan and the sort of US-Taiwan relationship, I mean, we were treaty allies for the first half of the Cold War. We had troops. It's just the world has changed multiple times as people have been on autopilot about what China really means.
Yeah, no question about it. And China's Belt and Road has expanded and bought strategic ports in Piraeus and in Europe, and they're building in Africa, and so South America. So the expansion is not only economic, but it could quickly become militarily. How do you foresee this continuing expansion throughout the world, buying strategic ports and rebuilding in Africa, building throughout South America? There was even talk that they would build a canal through South America that would challenge the Panama Canal. I mean, it's expansion that we have to deal with, and they have the money and the might to do it.
Sure. I mean, and the Belt and Road, I think, is an incredibly important thing that shouldn't be underestimated. I mean, it's one of the table stakes strategies for their ultimate sort of longer term ambitions. And really what it's about is tying multiple continents. I mean, from Europe to Asia to Africa. They even include South America in it. And that's, I think, a separate but important subject, but ultimately to tie the Eurasian African supercontinental structure together with China as the premier economy and the sort of hub of all spokes in the global trading system. And then their military is designed to defend, and they've said this explicitly, different points on the Belt and Road. So when you've seen their submarines dock in Sri Lanka, when you've seen them exercise with the Pakistanis in the Arabian Sea to defend Gwadar, these things are very much about the Belt and Road as essentially an imperial project. I mean, when you combine economics and military, you're talking about empire. So we would recognize this very easily in the 19th century. We recognize it somewhat less today, I think, unfortunately. But what it really means for all of us, and by the way, the other piece of this is that they're companies, and this is where you see the mergers in the shipping sector, and they're port building all over the planet. These are done by state-owned enterprises, which are nothing like our multinationals. I mean, these things go out essentially with the strategic direction, or at least with an understanding of what the state is looking to achieve worldwide, and they go and build for the Communist Party. So we're dealing with essentially super companies that are meant to go out, like perhaps the East India Company in a prior era, and seize territory and influence, really, informal empires, as one might call it, in different parts of the world. So what it really means is that the world economy is going to have to change a great deal in order to handle the China problem. And what this is going to entail is, first of all, we're going to have to disengage from China economically, piece by piece, sector by sector, industry by industry, technology by technology. The more that we engage, the more that we empower them. They cannot achieve their strategic goals without the technology, capital, and markets of the West. I mean, they sell to us. That's how they gain their, that's how their capital account works, and they reinvest that in strategic infrastructure and key technology, in locations around the world that matter, and also in industries that matter at home. So it's us, we are the ones that are fueling this. And this is why it's so important to watch the massive distance between those in national security that firmly and fully understand the China problem, and those in business that are expanding there, that see a long-term future, an expanding market, the world's largest market, whether that's, in the finance sector or in, a variety of other sectors, from manufacturing to chemicals to, you name it, anything pretty much at this point. We're playing from two different playbooks, and that has to be realigned. And it means that government will have to restrain our business leaders and pull them back from the China market ultimately. And that's not music to anyone's ears right now. But the risks that they're taking on are far, far greater than they understand, because the geopolitics at this point are really about China's confrontation, not just with the United States, but with the entire world.
With the entire world. And hence the flexing of its muscles in the South China Sea is not only a beginning with the Spratly Islands and the Japanese islands and its maritime assertion, which continues down through the Gulf of Tonkin and down through Indonesia, along there. They are expanding there, and they're doing it now. This isn't a long-term strategy. This is currently going on now. And therefore, this is the confrontation that the United States is having with them. As I mentioned before, that the Americans have brought back the Reagan Strike Group. They're based in Japan, and they're ready for action. And I think it's a little more than saber rattling, but what is your opinion about this offshore aggression?
Sure. I mean, they've been able to get away with it. And I think it's also useful to put it in the context of, their island building began sort of at the same period as Putin's takeover of Crimea. So you have two, very, very large anti-Western states that are pushing on either end of Eurasia. And that's also harkens back to the Cold War, when Stalin said to Mao, you take Asia, I'm going to take Europe. That's how this is going to go. So the Russia-China relationship is really tightened today in ways that we haven't seen in 50 years. So we're dealing with, I think, a very serious geopolitical issue here when it comes to China's maritime ambitions and also land ambitions, because you take the territorial disputes that they have. I mean, it's in the Himalayas with India, it's in the South China Sea with the whole of Southeast Asia, it's in the East China Sea with Japan. And the U.S. is sort of in the background there, because you're talking about major partners and treaty allies in this picture. So China is probing in all these directions with a military that is at this point quite sophisticated. They've gone through what H.R. McMaster called the largest peacetime buildup in modern history. So their navy has expanded massively. Their missile forces have expanded massively, and they're building a joint force now, sort of modeled on our system. So this is quite real, and not to be taken lightly, I think. And the other thing is, you just look at the nature of the South China Sea as they see it. It's not really an end in itself. It's the beginning of maritime corridors that go through the Indian Ocean, through the South Pacific, and even up through the Northern Sea Route in the Arctic. So for them, it still is sort of in a way, a cornerstone for this broader integration of Eurasia, Africa, Indian Ocean under sort of Chinese dominance, long-term dominance. But in order to get there, they are going to have to win certain battles. And Xi Jinping talks about this very regularly. He says, we're preparing to fight and win wars. We're preparing for the bloody battles of our era. I mean, this sort of rhetoric is constantly there.
Yeah.
And, you know, you add this all up and they I think are talking about getting to this long-term state where they are the dominant power in most of the world's geography through trade, through economic influence, and through the ability to, you know, deliver sort of military effect as needed. And that's what we're up against. So, so we're seeing the very early pieces of it in some ways, but the long-term vision is, you know, they've laid it out absolutely clearly. And we have to be dealing with both of those, not just the immediate concerns, but the long-term trajectory. We can't forget about the Indian Ocean just because we have a problem in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. It's all linked together for Beijing.
What about the current economic unraveling that's going on? We hear about their largest commercial, Evergrande, near bankruptcy. We hear about their economy. They're putting it down on billionaires and entrepreneurs. They're really kind of reeling everybody in. Economically, are they really what they seem to be in trouble?
I think so, and I think it's sort of a mixed bag. I mean, it's a complex economy at this point. It's sort of, you know, they have all sorts of sophisticated industries. They have a sophisticated consumer sector, but then they have a massive debt overhang that they've been building up for the last 20 years of sort of you know, debt fueled growth. So whether or not they're able to control this, and you know, many people who specialize in the Chinese financial sector will tell you that obviously it's not like our Western sectors. They can force borrowing, they can force lending, they can sort of come in and step in and you know, clean up some of the mess, is what many people say. So we shall see. And at the same time, you're talking about this much bigger problem of an over-leveraged housing sector. I mean, the Wall Street Journal's called it the world's biggest asset bubble. The fact that that's such an important and large piece of the Chinese economy as a whole, and then the fact that from a local to corporate to national level, China is steeped in debt. So that's not, at the end of the day, a healthy economy for growth. And what that really means in my mind is that, you know, you take that, then you add, you know, on, let's say, another side of the scale, the fact that many of the leading Western investment banks see China as continuing to grow and surpassing the US within the 2020s. I mean, that's the analysis of you know, pretty sophisticated you know, students of the Chinese economy. So which is it going to be? And I think the answer, they only surpass us if we continue to engage. If we start to disengage piece by piece, all of these structural problems really start to rear their head. Either way, their growth is going to be slowing. Some of their sectors will have serious trouble. But if we're continuing to provide this sort of backstop of their access to the world economy and to Western capital markets, they can probably continue to kick the can on their real economic problems for longer than they would without that.
American government is saying, build American. It's a great opportunity for them to do that. The supply chain just in time has been exposed as a failure. So this has also exposed China to China's economy. And we start there. So tell me about that China 25 model of high self-tech sufficiency, and where they're blending corporations with military. Isn't that what China 25 is about?
So I think there are a few things here that you're referring to, Tony. I mean, one is Made in China 2025, which is an industrial policy that seeks to dominate 10 different strategic industries, from electric vehicles to robotics to high-tech shipping and you know, maritime sector. Then there's civil military fusion, which is about basically fusing the civilian. It's about taking civilian innovation, you know, really innovation that happens in the civilian sector and bringing that to the military. So that does matter in the maritime sector. It certainly matters in AI and sort of other, you know, sort of advanced industries. And you add all of those things together, and I think you get the nature of the Chinese sort of civil military industrial base and just sort of wartime economy and all these things that they are think, quite actively building. So bottom line, I mean, if we turn back to something like Made in China 2025, and look at what that is meant to do, it's meant to essentially achieve self-sufficiency in key strategic industries of the future, new materials, biotech, next generation ICT. So Huawei is a very famous example there of one of the industries that they've been successful to a point in creating a major national champion that can have global reach. They're trying to do that across a range of industries. You know, you look at the shipping sector with the massive mergers that are taking shape, creating the largest shipping companies in the world, and even the purchase of Maersk's container line. I mean, you're talking about consolidation in an industry that is winding up. Well, it's winding up under where one state has much greater power than any other state, and that state happens to be an adversary of the West. So this is all bad. You can't go there. We really shouldn't. We're going to have to, you know, have alternatives to this. And I think that's where this is really going. Is you know, as you pointed out with the supply chain. I mean, the pandemic revealed that next, you know, just in time isn't going to work. But then the fact that we have the biggest geopolitical competition since probably the early Cold War taking shape right now. You know, it's going to mean that our economies are going to have to change quite a bit. We can't depend on an adversary. We're going to have to secure our supply chains, rebuild our industrial base, and stop sending you know, any of our technology over to China. We're going to be in this massive economic competition where the West will have to win. And on top of that, you have a military competition with a state that has active territorial claims with a lot of its neighbors. So this is I think it's a tougher period than anything since the, you know, early Cold War, you know, sort of 46 to 62, 65. And I don't think people get that yet.
Yeah.
And part of the reason they don't get that is because they're making money there. That wasn't
scares
true.
you the most about China today?
I think how quickly they appear to be gaining on the military front. I think the hypersonic test this month, or excuse me, it was in August, but it was reported this month. I think that was shocking for a lot of reasons that matter here. I mean, partly because the nature of conflict now is not necessarily just in the region. You know, so I think they're building a very sophisticated military that we must take seriously. And I think we're being way too slow about disengagement and about slowing them down. And I think our governments have not yet gotten our business people onto the right page here. And that's so important. Without that, you simply lose this long-term contest. You lose it in the near term. I mean, this all happens in the 2020s. And this is the decisive decade here where we win or lose the contest with China based on what we do. The choices that matter all happen right now.
So their allies are Korea and Russia?
Well, you know, it's complicated because on one hand, yes, North Korea is their only sort of treaty ally, but then Russia is a comprehensive strategic partnership, they call it. I think they've added some extra words to that recently, but they have a series of states that support them. I mean, on one hand, Russia, I think, is the most important in that picture in terms of its consequence for the West. I think Iran and Russia and China are getting closer together. You have this sort of anti-Western, anti-American coalition that's coming together. And then I think Pakistan is very important in this picture as well. You know, because on one hand, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is probably one of the most important pieces of the Belt and Road from their perspective, from Beijing's perspective. But on the other hand, I mean, Pakistan, while it may not seem that important to the United States or even to Europe, it's very important to India. I mean, it presents a sort of existential danger to India if it winds up in the sort of pointed in the wrong direction. So, you know, between Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, and North Korea, I mean, you've got, you know, quite a complicated game board here in terms of geopolitics, and some very hostile pieces on it who are working together more and more. And you can see this, I think, you know, to me, naval exercises are a pretty good expression of how geopolitical trends are going. And, you know, you look at Malabar, where the US, Australia, Japan, and India are exercising as the Quad. You look at the European Europeans going into the Indo-Pacific now. I mean, recently in the Philippine Sea with the UK and the Netherlands, and then you know, joining an exercise with the US, Japan, and Canada. But then you look at China and Russia that have just exercised, I believe, last week in the Sea of Japan. Now, they've been doing that for years. But they're also discussing exercises with the Iranians. So a Russia, China, Iran naval exercise would be, I think, a real sign of the times. So bottom line, you do have what I think President Biden and Secretary Blinken have talked about as a contest between autocracies and democracies. I mean, this is, as a historian, I mean, that's sort of the way the world goes. Almost fundamentally, we return to that place where it's dictatorships versus democracies, and we are there once again. The difference being that this is an integrated economy, and that's the part that's going to have to change. That's the only way that you can reverse the trends. You can't just win a military competition when the other side is growing based on your capital and your technology. You're going to have to pull that back, and then you can start to win the long-term trends if you maintain deterrence. And that's something we haven't talked about, which is, you've asked about the US sort of will when it comes to Taiwan. At the end of the day, no one in their right mind wants a war here. It's Beijing that continues to talk about war, to literally and regularly speak about preparing to go to war. They do this all the time. But what we need to do on the US side, on the allied side, the US, Japan, Australia, India, everybody in the picture, Europeans too, is make sure that we have a sufficient military presence so that the balance of power is such that it would be such a terrible move for Beijing to ever use that kind of force in the region. And if you can do that, if you can maintain deterrence and hold that line and maintain peace through strength in the Pacific, then there'll be a chance of winning the broader competition. If you can't do that, it's going to be a very, very ugly world very, very easily.
Yeah, now that you scared the hell out of me.
It's all just how it is, isn't it?
No, I mean, the reality is that we have been watching this over the last few years, and with the United States engaged in other parts of the world, they have not paid attention. Obviously, we are in a moment in time where we have to make some quick decisions, and I want to thank you for talking with us and helping us understand a lot more about what's taken place, and we hope to have you back again.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to see you. Great to be back.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening to In the Know, the Maritime Executive Podcast. We hope you'll join us again for our next exciting industry discussion. In the meantime, you can visit us at maritime-executive.com for top news on critical maritime issues.